Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Island Voices at COP29 session. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Grace Henry, and I am the Director of Projects at Island Innovation. I'm joining this session today live from COP29 in Baku. Our team is on the ground hosting a number of in-person and virtual side events, and we're so pleased to be bringing insights from island communities worldwide to the global stage. For more information about our COP29 programming, please visit us at islandinnovation.co/events/COP29/. Today, I'm very excited to be presenting this session titled Unlocking Climate Finance for Pacific SIDS, Pathways to Resilience at COP29. Before we begin, please look out for a quick poll appearing on your screen now. We'd love to learn more about who's here today, including your gender, location and sector or industry. I see some persons joining live from Baku. I hope to connect with you as well. Oh, I am seeing here that I may have closed the polls too quickly. My apologies. But I see persons joining from Africa, from the Caribbean, and also from Europe and all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. I encourage everyone to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and share where you're joining from. Feel free to add any thoughts or comments throughout the session. If you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function so we can address as many as possible during the Q&A segment of this session. All right, welcome from New Papua. Very good. Thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you for joining. I see you. All right, so at this time, it looks like we have a wonderful mix here today. Persons joining from India as well. Many of you are joining from several parts of the world, Philippines. Awesome. All right, it's now my pleasure to hand over to our moderator for this session, Kate Brown, who is the Executive Director of the Global Island Partnership. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Grace. And what a pleasure it is to be here. Well, not in Baku, but to be able to hear from some people that are in Baku and others that are based in the Pacific through this panel. And I think really important as this COP29 is really touted as the the finance COP. What does that mean? How does that going to impact the Pacific? And we've got some really great speakers. I won't talk too much here at the start so we can hear from them. As Grace said, we're hosted on Zoom, but the session is also recorded and live streamed on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on X. I'll read some audience questions, so please do put your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to those. And everyone will be muted and without camera, so in a typical webinar fashion. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Saud Minam, the Senior Private Sector Specialist for the Pacific from the Asian Development Bank. You have the floor, Saud.
Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, which part of the world are you joining in? It's a great pleasure for me to be a part of this beautiful forum and for the COP29. As we know that Pacific Island countries are the most vulnerable when it comes to the climate change. And as a matter of fact, we are facing it right now. One side of the island has got the beautiful sunshine and where you're flocking in a lot of tourists, and the other side of the island's got rain and just keep on raining. So it's a pretty day-to-day affair for Pacific Island countries, and I think Fiji and any other island country across the Pacific are basically the same. As far as the Asian Development Bank, I'll just go through. I have been given 7 minutes, and I've got my stopwatch on, so I can actually try to finish it as soon as possible within 7 minutes. Now, Asian Development Bank is present in across close to 60 plus some countries, but in Pacific you have about 14 island nations where we are. These are the members for Asian Development Bank. The total population, just for a little bit background for people who are on the call who may not know about this, the total population for these 14 countries is about 12.3 million. So anyone who's joining in from India would understand that exactly 12.3 million is only a small suburb of India. We have close to about 4.4 million people who are the working class out of the 12.3 million. Total GDP across these 14 countries is about $42.2 billion, which is pretty significant when you look at it from the 14 countries. May not be significant from a large country point of view, but from a small country. One of the beautiful part of the Pacific Island countries is the literacy ratio. They are, between 80 to 90% people are literate in Pacific Island countries. So that's the beautiful part of that. Now, I'll just go straight into the challenges and constraint. And before I do that, let me explain it to you what we are actually looking for Pacific out of the COP29 is what we are looking for is a simple way of, getting hold of the funds which are accessible through a very cumbersome and long process. And I think this is where the issue is coming in across Pacific Island countries. Let me just go through a few of these challenges which we have across Pacific Island countries. Would be a limited access to finance, and I think it's not only Pacific, but it's all would be good for all the SIDS. Human capital constraint, and I think it's the in terms of the capacity of individuals, because they may not be aware of some of these rules and regulations, and training was required. So those sort of things are basically the challenge. Obviously, the geographic isolation and high transport costs, because these are island countries, and between one island to another island, you don't have the airfare and no roads. So it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time cost as well. Regulatory barriers. I mean, if you look at it from a Pacific, a lot of people they look at Pacific as one country, but we can't paint the entire Pacific countries with same brush, because there are different countries, they've got different regulators, and we do have the regulatory barriers as well. The most important part is the vulnerability to climate change. And I think this is where the issue is the rising sea levels, cyclones, and other extreme weathers, which I just mentioned about it, one side of the island and the other side of the island. Now, having said that, I think it's very important to understand that these are all the challenges, but we have the opportunities and growth potential, the organizations like ADB, they can actually unleash the access to finance, we can support in terms of the strengthening governance. We can start helping these countries across Pacific Island countries, especially in the 14 ones, is digital economy, gender equality, and the most important part is the blue economy and the renewable energy. So, one more thing which I'd like to talk about is ADB is committed to achieving, prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Pacific, while sustaining its effort to eradicate extreme poverty. And there are extreme poverty in some of the segments in this Pacific. Now, in terms of the funds, we have actually committed 253 million for specific developing member countries in 2003, including 100 million in climate finance. So there's a pretty decent amount of money which has basically been committed. A lot has been basically draw down or disperse, as I say, close to about $270 million have been dispersed. And we have financed about $107, $108 million worth of co-financing through the different partners. especially in some of those places where we have actually looked at not only the climate, but we also looked at in terms of the health, in terms of the medical services, in terms of building bridges, transport. These are all part of the climate and resilience package, because here in this part of the world, getting across from one place to the other place is very difficult. So I think it's important for everyone to understand where we are and what we need to do. Organizations like ADB and the other large organizations, be the GCF or the others, they just need to understand one thing. And I think where we are coming in from Asian Development Bank point of view, there's a huge focus on how to simplify these processes, especially for Pacific Island countries. As I earlier said, the 12.3 million people, in about 14 countries. So, in size of the economy, these are all where these are barriers which we have, but we all have the same needs. I mean, if I can give you an example, the largest country, which has about 10 million people, and the smallest country in Pacific Island countries is about 1,688 people. So, the requirement, the need for 1,700 people is exactly the same as 10 million people or 1 million people. So those are the issues and challenges which we have. And I think from an organization point of view, we need to have the support coming in and actually unlocking all those potentials which we have for Pacific Island countries. One last thing which I'll say, we are not driven by the large dollar number, because we do not have the large deals, but our small deals are as much as large as it possibly can be for any other Asian countries or any other else in the world. So a $10 million deal may be equivalent to about a $100 million deal in some of the larger countries in the world. I can carry on for a bit because I do have an experience with the Fiji Development Bank as well, where friends who would be coming in a little later on, I have worked with them. We have actually a lot of support coming in from these other organizations in terms of the accreditation, so we can access the funds. Here, I'll stop right here because it's 7 minutes already, and I need to give opportunity to the other colleagues. Back to you, Kate.
Wonderful, thank you. Really awesome input, and I think really helping set the scene for the realities of the Pacific, both in terms of the finance needed and some of the constraints that the Pacific is under as it moves forward to address climate change and other connecting challenges. Our next speaker is Mr. Kunal Singh, who's really addressing some of these issues with the Regional Climate Finance Access Network, or CFAN. He's an advisor to that, works at the Pacific Community, or SPC, and actually is joining us from Baku. So I think we'll get some great insight. So over to you, Kunal.
Thank you, Kate. I was just trying to put my slide on. Just give me one moment. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's always hard to battle with technology. Okay, I found it. Kate, let me know once you have that on the screen.
Yeah, it's on the screen, and I think it just needs to be put into. Yes, it's on the screen now.
Great, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to have me there. Like I said, it's great to join here from Baku, so I can provide some live updates on where we are on climate finance. And I think South has set the stage pretty well in terms of where we are in the region, what we need. I'd probably just start off with a quick quote on NCQG and COP29. I think how I see NCQG at COP29, I think is the lifeline. And when I say it's the lifeline, I think that's where everything revolves around, whether it's mitigation or adaptation or loss and damage. If there's no enough or sufficient financing, I think it's very hard to achieve these priorities. So that's why I thought lifeline to climate resilience for SIDS in particular, we need the NCQG by all means to be agreed at COP29. And that's what we have been telling our leaders, our Pacific climate champions, our SIDS champions, that when you are talking to your counterparts in the developed countries, we need to push them and say that NCQG must be agreed, and there's no should or if, it must be agreed at COP29. And there's various reasons for that, and I'll probably go into the next slide and talk about that. Now, quickly, what is the NCQG? And everyone is talking about the NCQG. This is called the Climate COP. Everyone has been talking about the NCQG for the last 2 years. But to be honest, I think the NCQG came in 2009 for the first time. If I can just quickly go into that. In the COP process, NCQG was brought up in 2009 once, but probably a bit too early in the process. Later on, when the process started, they came up with 100 billion per year climate goal for SIDS and LDCs. This was agreed at a political level in 2009 and was supposed to be agreed and achieved by 2020. Now, this was not achieved for various reasons. Again, developed countries were not able to meet this goal. The recent OECD report says that the goal was achieved in 2022. 115.9 billion US dollars was committed by developed countries for climate action to developing countries. Now, this is again debatable because the mechanism they used to actually say this was achieved was again flawed. Right? So there was a sort of a bit of argument there, but it was agreed and achieved 2 years later. Now, under the Paris Agreement, which was signed in COP21 in 2015, there was a resolution that said that we need a new financial mechanism that takes the countries from 2025 and beyond. So 2009 said 100 billion. Now in 2015, Paris Agreement said there needs to be a new goal after 2025, that means post 2025, that takes care of the developing countries and the vulnerable countries post 2025. That's where the NCQG was born. So the new collective and quantified goal that we are talking about, that's where it was born. And there's various reasons for that. The previous 100 billion goal was not agreed at the negotiations table that we're doing now. It was agreed at the political level. So a lot of people try to use the term that it was plucked out of the air by our leaders and agreed. We are trying to go away from that. We are trying to go and ensure that the NCQG is supported by science, is supported by the vulnerability on the ground, and it's actually be supported by the real issues, right? What the NCQG tries to address the big term quantum, because NCQG is, if I'm supposed to put that in one line, NCQG is a goal. It's supposed to give you a number, whether it's 100 billion or it's 500 billion or 1.1 trillion dollars. But it's supposed to give you a quantum at the end of the day, right? That's the biggest goal. So NCQG must address the quality, the quantity, the quality. How when you talk about the quality, and I think the previous speaker talked about the quality of finances, what are these finances like? Are they loans? Are they concessional finance? Are they equity-based finance? Are they guarantees? Right? So when you talk about quality, these are the things we talk about. And of course, the scope, the access features, the transparency. How are the developed countries reporting to the UNFCCC Secretariat? What are they committing? And this has become a really sensitive issue for countries like Fiji and the others. We don't know what Australia is committing, or we don't know what New Zealand is committing, or the US for that matter. There's a hard red line with what constitutes as climate finance and ODA finance, official development assistance. We are really putting a strong push for the NCQG to be new, additional, and so it's new, additional, and predictable climate finance. It doesn't need to be confused with ODA. No way can it be confused with ODA. Countries cannot use their ODA to meet their climate ambition. Maybe in some cases they can, but that disadvantages countries such as the Cook Islands, who cannot get ODA because of their according to the OECD rules, they are classified as a medium. I mean, I'm not sure how to say that, but I think our finance experts here probably have a better way of framing it. But they're not able to access climate finance or development finance as the other countries are able to. Let me just quickly put current state of play. What are we getting, and what we need, and what we are getting in terms of climate finance? What we need is approximately 1 billion US dollars annually for resilience and adaptation, for SIDS. That means Caribbean SIDS, Pacific SIDS, and LDCs. What we're receiving right now, what we need to meet our NDCs alone is about 650 million US dollars. Now, this is according to the NDC investment plans that have been prepared by NDC Hub or any other partner, Triple GI. That comes to about 650 million US dollars until 2030. What we are, for example, like in the case of Fiji, I think Fiji's investment plan says that Fiji needs approximately 2.3 billion US dollars to meet its NDC targets, whether it's energy or transport or maritime or whatever. So for one country only, it's 2.3 billion. Some other countries in the region have not costed their NDC, which is why the figure, the second point, is quite low. It's just 650 million, because I think there's some maths that wasn't done well there. What we're receiving from the global financial architecture is less than 2%. If you look at GCF reports or IF reports or OECD, they can very proudly say that they have mobilized 40% of climate finance in the Asia Pacific region. When you say Asia Pacific, it's a vast region. What we're getting in the Pacific is only 2% of the international climate finance, and that is really small compared to the needs. What we're receiving, like I said, is let me just quickly. What we're receiving is approximately 220 million US dollars for now, right? Climate finance. That's approximately 0.022% of global promise. So if you try to do your math, I think 222 million out of the 100 billion target that was set is just 0.22% of the global climate promise, right? Most of this climate finance is short term, is unsustainable, it is not predictable. We are not able to plan what we're going to do on our nature-based seawalls or whatever for the next 10 years, because the funding is really short. And there's, of course, order restrictions. So this was what I was trying to describe in the Cook Islands scenario. There's order restrictions to our climate finance. Now, why is the NCQG important, and why does it matter to the Pacific? Now, let me quickly touch base on the Paris Agreement. I wouldn't go into the detail of the technicalities because, of course, it's quite legal. Article 2.1c is the heart of the Paris Agreement. Now, when I say heart of the Paris Agreement, Article 2.1c says that developed countries need to mobilize climate finance for developing countries to meet their adaptation and mitigation needs. Full stop. That's it. Right? And that is what we are going with. Article 9 of the Paris Agreement is really important for us as SIDS analysis, because this leads to the operationalization of Article 2.1c. Article 2.1c just very broadly says that developed countries need to mobilize that finance. But Article 9 actually sets that into practice. Where is this finance coming from? Who is the recipient? Who is the contributor? And where are these finance targeted at? So that's Article 9. Now, the special circumstances of SIDS. If you go back to 1992, the first Earth Summit, I wasn't around that time, but I think the agreement, and we are still trying to go from that. I think there was an agreement in 1992 Earth Summit that SIDS are the vulnerable states, and we need to protect their special circumstances. Now, it's quite astonishing that every time we attend these COP meetings, we have to negotiate that, and I think we have put a really hard red line this time in the NCQG that SIDS special circumstances is not negotiable. It's nowhere negotiable. We cannot say that the other regions are not vulnerable, but SIDS have their special vulnerabilities and issues, whether it's our fragile economies or our, I wouldn't say political issues, it's not the right forum to say that, but there's other issues that actually put us in sort of that frontline scenario, right? Climate finance needs of SIDS and LDCs is why we are strongly advocating for the NCQG. We need equitable, enough, and fast climate to flow into the region to meet our climate needs, and of course keeping to the 1.5 temperature goal. Now, let me quickly go back to the negotiations. What is unfolding here in Baku right now, and this is our position, is the 5 things I put here on the negotiations table. Right now, we have the second iteration of the draft text. Now, when I say the draft text, the co-chairs, which is made up of South Africa and Australia, they are the ones who release the draft text for us negotiators to then negotiate it with the presidency. At this point, we're 3 days behind the schedule. We are in the 3rd day of COP, but we did not have a draft text until 8 a.m. this morning. That was when I joined this COP. We finally have a draft text, but it's still a draft text. The parties now need to agree that this draft text will be the basis of negotiations for the NCQG to be agreed at COP29. And I wouldn't read the whole detail, but I think that's the PCIDS and the IOC's position on the NCQG. Minimum allocation flows, grant-based finance, concessional finance, channels, contributor base. Now, the contributor base is quite sensitive. One of the resolutions that the developed countries are wanting to push for is the expansion of the contributor base. When I say the expansion of the contributor base, they want some countries that are in the SIDS and LDCs group to become contributors to the NCQG, right? Now, it might not be such an issue for Fiji or Cook Islands or Samoa for now, because we are the recipient base, but in the next 10 years, this would be a serious issue, and we might end up with becoming a contributor rather than a recipient, right? Because our economies are growing, and our South, I think, probably can talk more about this in the discussion. Our economies are growing. We'll probably migrate from a small island state into a mid category according to the OECD rules very soon, and that might just take away our special circumstances. So the contributor base is a red line that I've put there. How does the NCQG outcomes affect the Pacific? I wouldn't go over all the details, but just key points to touch there. I think we want the NCQG to be new, additional, and predictable climate finance. We want to differentiate between order and climate finance. So that's the top line. Access to financial mechanisms. How are we accessing financing from the GCF, Adaptation Fund, JEF, or any other climate finance mechanisms under the Paris Agreement? Right? Enhanced readiness and increased allocation for increased allocation. Now, for SIDS, and just to put a figure to that, we are advocating for a 39 billion US dollar target for SIDS and LDCs per year. That's our minimum allocation flows. And to be honest, I don't really care what the big quantum of the NCQG is. It might end up to 1.1 trillion, but that does not change the game for us. We will only be able to access what we can access from this financial mechanism based on our vulnerabilities. So that's why we are really advocating for the minimum allocation flows. The number 39 is because there are 39 SIDS in the world, 1 billion according to the IMF report that was released on the 24th of October before we started. Climate finance and pathway to resilience. So why is climate finance and the NCQG really important for the Pacific to achieve its resilience? I think most of our NDCs and NEPs will be just pieces of paper and document if we don't have climate finance to achieve these targets. So we really need climate finance to actually achieve the targets. That's why I'm saying to become more resilient, we need finance to be going in line with our policies. Right? The NCQG will have some innovative approaches to mobilizing climate finance, such as creating the right enabling environment for private and public sectors. Now, we are not really pushing the private sector for now, but it is definitely in the text. It will also lead to the expansion of debt suspension to include debt relief and debt forgiveness and debt servicing assistance. The last line that I'd like probably to touch on is the mobilization. We cannot talk about access if you're not really mobilizing finance. We need to mobilize finance at the rate and speed that it needs to achieve the climate needs of countries and communities. Right. I'll probably stop there because that's my last slide. I can see Kate waiting, but thank you so much, Kate, and I'll stop there. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanal. I could have listened to you for another hour, to be honest, because that's really fascinating. And I think great insight from someone that both supports the Pacific region in accessing climate finance, but also is now kind of involved in the negotiation. So I really wish you guys good luck. We're going to move to our next speaker, who is Katerina Singalakis, who's the Regional Director for the Pacific of the GGGI. And here she is. We'll take away. Over to you, Katerina.
Hi, thanks, Kate. I hope you can all hear me well. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone from wherever you're joining around the world. I'm here in Fiji, and I'd like to focus a little bit on, what's happening at the moment in the Pacific and how that relates to what may or may not happen at COP29 and the existing mechanisms and how they might be improved. The Global Green Growth Institute, for those of you that don't know us, we're an international intergovernmental organization with our HQ in Seoul in South Korea. And we have 48 members around the world, member countries, and we work in all 14 Pacific Island countries, and we have offices in 8 of those countries, and our regional offices in Fiji and Suva. So the approach that we take, and I think it's an approach that is really a very necessary one for the Pacific for climate finance. It's a very holistic approach. My colleagues Saud and Kunal have touched upon the issues facing the challenges facing Pacific Island countries to access climate finance, the complexity, the lack of capacity, the limited, just simply the limited number of people in the Pacific to work on this topic versus the complexity of accessing the current financial mechanisms. And so the first thing I wanted to mention is it's something that's underway to try and help to address this, which is supporting countries with climate finance advisors and creating a network of advisors, in this case called the Climate Finance Access Network, which is a broad partnership between many organizations. GGI is implementing it with SPC, RMI, SPREP, and other organizations. And what happens with the aim is, if there's the aim of that network and the climate finance advisors that have been placed within 8 Pacific Island countries, and they're embedded within, these advisors are embedded within the Ministries of Finance and the Ministries of Climate Change, that working directly with the civil servants that are tasked to access climate finance and bring it into the country from GCF, from the Adaptation Fund, from bilateral, multilateral agencies. So working directly with them to do 2 things. One is to support them to overcome the complexities, to provide that additional technical capacity to write the proposals, to meet the requirements. Now, I have to say here that, yes, what we want out of COP29 is simpler requirements, as Kunal said, to recognize the special circumstances of the Pacific, to simplify requirements, criteria, but we don't have that yet. So what we're doing at the moment is, through climate finance advisors embedded in the countries, is to assist to write the concept notes, write the proposals that meet the requirements, and so that and create a pipeline of projects that is growing, but those projects are led by the countries, directly addressing what's in the NDCs, what's in the national adaptation plans. Like Kunal said, it's very nice to have the documents, NDCs, national adaptation plans, but we have to have a way of financing those adaptation plans, right? So, and so what we need to do, so these climate finance advisors are supporting that aspect, and at the moment there's a pipeline of over 400 million in projects being developed with governments. And on the other hand, those climate advisors, obviously what we want to do is, when we are going through the requirements, we want to be training, we want to providing the institutional capacity and strengthening to the government counterparts themselves, because it has to be institutionalized, it has to be locally available, those skills. And yes, there's a turnover of staff in those ministries. So it's important to provide continuous updates, training, and it's really on the job. It's not so much bringing everybody in a workshop, but it's about sitting in those focus groups together with civil servants, with climate finance officers, and working together on proposals and figuring out how to bring those forward and to get those submitted to the right funding agency. So matching government priorities, what's in the NDC, what's in the NAP, with the right funder, and getting the proposal approved. So that's one initiative that's underway, which I think, you know, is the important thing is to, whatever mechanisms are put in place by UNFCCC, that the Pacific is able to take advantage of those, while pushing for improvements in those mechanisms and for the special circumstances of the Pacific to be recognized. So another thing that's underway is also to not just look at access, but also what we're seeing is the funding sometimes is access, but it's not being absorbed. So it's there, but I think, as Saad mentioned, you still have to do contracting. You have to figure out due diligence. There's lots of steps towards absorbing it into the countries and making sure that that money actually results in the impact that was desired from the proposal. And to do that, again, a big part of that is providing, what GGI is doing is providing dedicated advisors in countries on the ground, working in ministries of climate change, ministries of energy, in the direct access entities, supporting direct access entities such as the Fiji Development Bank, and now the newly accredited Bank of Cook Islands. Congratulations to them for their recent accreditation to the GCF. So supporting those entities to strengthen their systems and the tools to be able to absorb those. So standard operating procedures, templates, standardization, meeting environmental and social safeguards requirements. All of those need to be in place. So the executing entities, so once the ministries have accessed the finance and brought it into the country, the implementing agencies are often different entities. They're the line ministries or development banks or utilities. They need to be able to access that finance, get the contracting done, set up their project management units, and get the projects underway. Otherwise, we've accessed the finance, but it's not actually doing anything good at the end of the day. That absorption element, as I said, is setting up support systems and tools, but also in some cases there's a need for that international finance to become managed at the national level, and also to combine with domestic finance. So some of the work that GTI is doing with a number of countries, for example, in Vanuatu, we helped establish the National Green Energy Fund. So bringing domestic finance plus international finance plus climate finance into rural electrification via renewables. A newer initiative that is underway is with in Kiribati, the Kiribati Environment Fund, to set up a national fund that's going to look at bringing in and having at the local level available a national fund that can then disperse it locally at with appropriate criteria to local organizations, NGOs on the ground that are implementing projects that protect the environment or on waste management. And I can go on and on about examples of national financing vehicles that are being supported. And those national financing vehicles are very important to bring finance all the way down to the grassroots levels, as they can act as aggregators and support ministries of finance and others to disperse funds that are received down to grassroots organizations, which is a very important part of achieving what we want to achieve in terms of the impact. If I could just say couple more things, Kate, just one more line is, I just want to emphasize the importance of the financial systems. Greening the financial systems in the Pacific is also an important part of absorption and of changing the narrative. And this is what I mean here is working with central banks and development banks as key players in this area that can influence how the private sector operates, how commercial banks operate, and then make the flow of green finance easier through to SMEs, for example, through green loan products. And that's a very important element, facilitating that change of the financial system to be take into account climate risks and creating mechanisms to respond to those risks on the ground. So I'll stop there. I hope I've given a bit of a flavor of things that are already underway and happening in the Pacific, and a little bit of how they link up to the need to actually change some of the systems through the mechanism, the COP29 mechanism. So on the ground, we can get even further. At the moment, we're pushing against some of these mechanisms and bringing up all the complexities which are really standing in the way. We could get more done. Hopefully the negotiations at COP29 are going to help us to break through some of these barriers and get more done on the ground. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Catalina. And I could have listened to you and all of the speakers actually for about another 2 hours, which is why I have not been so good on the disciplining on the time. So apologies about that. And I also think you bring up some really critical points about absorptive capacity and actually getting funds into projects and disperse. So there's one thing, advocating for money. The other end of it is actually seeing it have impactful, purposeful implementation at island level, and some really great bright spots and examples there. So thank you for that. And our next and final speaker, before we have a few very brief questions, is Ms. Priyanka Dashani, who is the Climate Finance Advisor at Oxfam Pacific. And over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Kate. Bula and hello to everyone. I'm Priyanka. Oxfam Climate Finance Advisor for the Pacific, working closely with partners across Tuvalu, Timor-Leste, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, PNG, and Fiji to drive the climate finance strategies that build resilience and sustainable growth throughout the region. Well, 5 years ago, Oxfam in the Pacific embarked on a transformative journey with a clear vision to become an independent local regional organization and play a pivotal role in the global push for equity and balance across the Confederation. This strategic shift is aimed at ensuring that the unique realities, strategic insights, values, and culture of the Pacific region gain increased relevance and influence on the global stage. We are dedicated towards channeling resources that are best positioned to respond urgently to the challenges of climate change, governance, and inclusion. As curators of our island homes and the vast Pacific Ocean that sustains us, we hold a deep responsibility to future generations, just as our ancestors did for countless generations before us. As Oxfam in the Pacific, we place climate resilience at the heart of our mission, striving to protect the well-being of our communities while addressing the intense pressures of climate change. Our efforts focus on empowering communities to lead and shape sustainable, locally driven solutions that secure our future. Well, this mission drives us to intensify the adaptation and mitigation efforts grounded in the invaluable knowledge of Indigenous and local communities. Through strategic initiatives and partnership, we work to build resilience that honors our Pacific heritage, empowering communities to manage and conserve resources more effectively in the face of climate challenges. To advance climate resilience and gender justice, we collaborate with Oxfam Aotearoa and the New Zealand government through Touted program with a 5-year New Zealand $12.6 million investment. Touted supports women and communities in the Solomon Islands, PNG, Tuvalu, and Timor-Leste for now. This partnership promotes inclusion, governance, and climate finance solutions, ensuring women play a central role in decision-making and resilient efforts. By strengthening civil society's advocacy and supporting transparent climate finance, Touted empowers communities across the Pacific to effectively adapt to climate challenges. Recent Oxfam's research reveals that the economic toll of climate disasters in the Pacific has surged eightfold, now amounting to Australian $7.3 billion. This stark figure highlights the urgent need for substantial finance support to address the region's escalating climate risks. Over the past decade, the annual GDP loss from climate disasters in the Pacific nations have jumped from 3.2% to a staggering 14.3%, a severe impact when compared with Australia's most costly climate event that happened in 2022, the New South Wales flood, which accounted for only 0.4% of its GDP. This contrast underscores the unfair burden Pacific Island nations carry due to the climate change today. Despite these mounting costs, countries like Australia are contributing far less than needed, with only 265.9 million AUD pledged in climate finance for 2022 and 2023, while Oxfam joins many in the global south in calling for climate debt reparations of at least 5 trillion annually from the wealthiest, most polluting nations. Additionally, Oxfam advocates for higher quality climate finance with an emphasis on grants over the loans and insists that the new collective quantified goal include provisions for loss and damage caused by climate change. Well, lastly, without sufficient and sustainable funding, Pacific states and other low-income nations will remain unable to protect their communities, recover from climate-induced disasters, or adapt to the intensified impacts of climate change. Climate finance is not just a necessity today, it's a lifeline that will determine our future, and it's essential that wealthy, polluting nations acknowledge their responsibility and act with urgency to fulfill their commitments at COP and beyond. I believe this is the time to step up and deliver is now, and our survival depends on it. So, well, thank you, and Vinaka, over to you, Kate.
Vinaka, thank you so much. And I think some really, more from an NGO perspective, a really important view about the reality of where climate finance actually needs to end up in Indigenous local communities driven by those needs. We're going to move now into a panel, and we have about 9 minutes, I think, if my maths is correct. And so I'm going to ask everyone that is on the panel to turn on their cameras and join us so we can ask some questions. And I think there is one question that there's a few questions, but there's one I think that I'm not sure who can answer this, but just let me know who wants to. But it's really about, I think a couple of you touched on this, but about how local NGOs, including from Papua New Guinea, this question is from Papua New Guinea, can access climate finance, which I think is a long ongoing question. Who would like to take that question? And we can have a couple of different perspectives on that. Yes, Katrina.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's to say that I think there needs to be support to national bodies, such as, and it has happened before, like ministries of finance, for example, during COVID, became much, created mechanisms to quickly disperse funds down to grassroots level because of the emergency and the needs. And why can't we do that also in the case of where funding is needed for climate finance, for climate change projects? So I think support needs to be looked at, brought in to look at how to create mechanisms where there is aggregating entities that are closer to the grassroots level, that are entities that NGOs and small and medium-sized enterprises work with regularly. So, for example, development banks are a good example. We can support them to get climate finance, or support other aggregators to access climate finance. They're the appropriate entities to then disperse it down further to NGOs and to SMEs, rather than trying to get from a huge global mechanism like GCF directly to NGOs is very difficult. So finding those aggregating entities and supporting them to get to the grassroots level is very important.
Does anyone else want to touch that? Yes, Kunal.
Yeah, Kate, just very two quick points on that. I think one is there is a direct access window under the GEF at COP16 CBD COP. They agreed that they have a direct access window for indigenous communities, women, youths, and the vulnerable people. Vulnerable communities under the GEF. It's not existing at the GCF or the AF level at the moment, or probably any other climate finance mechanisms. So it's still an ongoing process for these other mechanisms. But under GEF, yes. Now that information will be with the countries, the NDAs. They will have that kind of information of how or which window will allow them to access it. Now, secondly, like just building up on Katharina's point is, I think it also depends on the accredited entities that are in the region, SPCs, PrEP, that are regional accredited entities, but there's the other entities such as ADB and the others who will be in the best position to say how equitable one of the communities or a variety of communities are to be partnering on a project proposal. Because when we take these project proposals or concept notes to the board, the credibility of the proposal is questioned. So we need to have some mechanisms, and it's a 1 day or 2 day thing to fix. I think it needs to be an ongoing process that NDAs need to take with accredited entities into building capacity into organizations or institutions that are local and regional for them to partner on the project proposal. So I leave it there, and maybe some others want to take it.
Anyone out? Yeah. I think I can touch on this as well, even though I am moderator. But there's also things like the GEF Small Grants Program, which is really targeted towards towards NGOs in terms of scale, and that has stuff that connects to climate funding. And then there's also organizations like Micronesia Conservation Trust, which is a conservation trust fund that now is working on, as an adaptation fund entity. It's now working to try and make that connection a little bit more from local communities, local NGOs across Micronesia, and some of these big funds that are coming in, I think, are really good examples in the rest of the world. building on that, are there any other, we touched on some of these during everyone's talks, but are there any good examples? And we've got like 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you to have 1 minute to think about sharing some good examples or a last 1 minute closing statement on this. And sorry that we're thinking, we'll start with Priyanka, since you were last, Priyanka. So you have 1 minute. Oh. Maybe we'll, yeah, there you go. Are you able to unmute? Perfect.
Yeah. Sorry, what am I supposed to do?
You're just identifying some things across the region that you think are working, or having a 1 minute last kind of closing thing, kind of based on what you've heard from the others as we close out that.
Yeah, I mean, we had a climate finance workshop in Solomons last month. And so we met all of the partners from Tuvalu, Timor-Leste, and like I think Fiji, and mostly they were there. And we did kind of like understood the different challenges different partners and the countries are having when it comes to climate financing. And I think it's still there's a huge disparity with the data and accessing like where the money is coming in and going. So that has been one of the challenges, I think, and we will be working towards that and trying to resolve more of how we can overcome that. And perhaps also Oxfam is also trying to work with the GCF in getting the accreditation so that they can try and work with getting funding and the financing aspect of the projects in these countries, I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Priyanka. And thank you for your intervention. Katarina. You have a 1 minute closing or highlighting something that you think is really working. Are you able to, are you speaking, or your audio is connecting? Well, your audio's failed. Maybe we'll ask Kunal to give a 1 minute thing while we see what's happening with Katarina's audio.
Sure, thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think I would say that let's not be too negative about the climate finance space. I think things are working. The recent adaptation gap report said from 2021 to 2022, the adaptation funding has increased from 21 billion to 28 billion. So that's the largest increase since the Paris Agreement. So I think that's a good sign. It's a learning process. It's not a sprint. I think it's a marathon. As far as we are continuing to advocate the importance and the need of climate finance and continuing to build that capacity either through readiness or other mechanisms, I think we'll definitely get there. Like I said, the NCQG or whatever goal comes next, we are not really too worried about how big the global goal is. The Pacific will be only able to access what it can access. That's my bottom line. And I think South probably is smiling, but he understands the cruel side of this. So I'll leave the final words to the man himself. Over to you, South.
Yes, over to you.
I thank you very much for putting me on the spot here, Kunal. But no, I think as I see that we do have close to about 47 participants. So my request to every one of them is that please don't give up. It's not an easy process. I mean, this is not a game which you can win in 1 day or 2 days. You need to have patience, and in terms of not only the patience, but you need to have the perseverance that you can continue to go and continue to talk about it. Because see, it's in our own interest. It's not the interest of anyone else. It is our own interest. So we have to drive our own agenda. We need to make sure that everyone understands where the problems are. We need to highlight the issues where the issues are. We have to continue to advocate that at the biggest and the smallest frame wherever we can do that. The last thing, which is that there are 1,000 and other avenues other than getting the accreditation done, to be honest with you. And I would like to highlight this, it's not only the GCF piece, which basically can only provide you the climate funds or environment changes or anything else. There are a lot of these other organizations. In every country, they have that availability there. So, and I think that's where the world is actually moving towards it. So I am more than happy to take anyone on the call to take it through the whole process, not an issue at all, but stay on it. You have to be committed in order to get that because it's in our interest. Thank you.
Awesome. And the good news is that Katarina, I think, is back. So your last statement.
Yeah, I just a very quick message to, I guess, to COP29. Hopefully, some of the negotiators will hear this and be able to do something about it. I think what we need to do is to match the finance that is needed with the finance that is available with what's really needed on the ground. And what the Pacific Island countries are asking for is primarily grant-based finance for adaptation and resilience building. Why should the Pacific be taking out loans to adapt to something that wasn't caused by the Pacific? So we are seeing that a lot of projects are being developed, focused on adaptation, resilience. They need to be grant financed, but then if you look at the financing that's available, most of it is not grant finance. There's not enough of grant finance out there. So that's one example, but again, it's mainly that the finance that is out there needs to be adapted to the needs of the Pacific. And if we can do that, if we can move towards that, then access and absorption will become a lot easier, and then implementation and impact on the ground will become a lot faster. We've only, after all, got 6 years till 2030 and the SDGs and the end of the NDC's deadline as well. So there's not a lot of time to make those changes in the financial mechanisms that are actually available. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was an extremely rich discussion, and I think yeah, I mean, we look forward to seeing what comes out of COP29 and wish very well. I think I was in Antigua and Barbuda at the SIDS meeting in May, and the special case of SIDS was really in an effort to be eroded, and it's good to see the Pacific and other SIDS turning up very strongly, both at CBD COP and at COP29 to push for the things that are important to them. I think as over the next 5 or 10 years, a lot of that will continue to be eroded because of the what is likely to be happening in some of these countries themselves in terms of their own climate disasters and those impacts there. So it's going to be an interesting thing in the climate finance discussion. Obviously, critically important that there are resources to address some of these issues, including both mitigation and adaptation action. So thank you again, and I pass back to Grace.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to our esteemed panel for sharing such invaluable insights in today's session and for highlighting the critical role of climate finance in securing a sustainable future for Pacific small island developing states. Finally, thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please be sure to explore our event calendar for a full list of events we're organizing during COP29. See you soon.